First, I want to congratulate the high school seniors. Many of you are off to college or beginning your first job, and I want to say that God can still speak to you even at college. So make sure that you are listening for his voice and responding. The way that our faith is that there is always more to learn and more for us to grow. So that means you have to keep listening and keep responding. Today, from our readings, something that spoke to me is that the end of the story matters. Sometimes when people get a book, they immediately flip to the last page and they want to know how it ends. Or they might be in the middle and they're curious what happens to a certain character. So they read the last chapter so that they can know what happens to that character. Well, we as Christians know what the final chapter is. Christ has died and risen from the dead. This is the 5th Sunday of Easter, and so we are celebrating his resurrection. Specifically, we hear how Jesus is glorified. We sang the Gloria, so we give glory to Jesus and God the Father. Our readings today as well, they point to the fact that we need the entire story. So we hear in the book of Revelation. So the book of Revelation has been used to predict the end of the world. People focus on kind of war and pain and anger that appears in it. But the reading from today is at the end. It talks about a new heaven and a new earth. That is where we are headed. That is the good news. In that reading from Revelation, we hear, "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death or mourning, wailing or pain, for the old order has passed away." I want you to think of something in your own life that has caused pain or suffering, something that has brought tears to your eyes. I will do the same. Now I want you to think of life without that in it, that pain or suffering completely gone. That is where we are headed to, this eternal kingdom where there is no mourning, no tears. There is only the love of the Father. So heaven is where we're headed, but we live today in a world that still has that pain and suffering. We hear that in the reading from the Acts of the Apostles. So Paul and Barnabas have just gotten back from a missionary journey, and they've preached the gospel, and they've had success, that people have converted to Christ. And yet, we hear that there is still hardship. It's not an easy road. Paul and Barnabas, they say, "It is necessary for us to undergo many hardships to enter the kingdom of God." So even though they were doing the will of the Father, it was a difficult task. Just because we are doing Christ's will, it's not going to be easy for us. Today's gospel reading, it gives us the roadmap of how to get to heaven. Jesus says, "I give you a new commandment, love one another. As I have loved you, so you also should love each other." To me, this doesn't sound so much like a new commandment. Jesus has preached loving others the entire gospel, but what's new about it is John placing this emphasis on, "As I have loved you." So the Father loved us first by sending his Son. That was his act of love. He loved us first, and then we respond. At least in my own life, I often think, oh, I'm initiating something with God, or I'm initiating a task or doing something. And it's really the Father prompting me first, and I then I'm responding. So the Father, he's asking us to mirror his love. And that is something difficult to do. So we as humans are called to mirror the divine, mirror the Father's love. What's interesting about it is this paradox, because it's by our human love, the way that we love other people, that others encounter the divine. They encounter the love of the Father by our own actions. I think of the saints who have followed Christ and who have led people to the church and to heaven. And that's what we're called to do, is to follow that same path, to set that example, to lead people to heaven. So often when people think of this idea of love, they think only of Valentine's Day and chocolates and roses. But the love that we hear about today is the love of the Father. So it's selfless, it's sacrificial, it's Jesus dying on the cross so that salvation is possible. That's how we are called to love each other in that way. In the gospel today, if you are reading it out of the Bible, there is one verse that wasn't included, and I'm not sure exactly why it wasn't included. But what it says is, "Where I go, you cannot come." The disciples must have had a feeling of, how can that be that I can't go to where the Father is going? I was reading a commentary about it, and what it said is that at this point in the gospel, that Jesus had not died and he had not risen. So therefore the gates of heaven hadn't been opened. And that's why the disciples can't join Jesus. We here today, when we hear this passage, we know the final chapter. We know that Christ has died and that he has risen. And we know that we can be with him in eternity. And so if we are able to love each other as the Father has called us to love, we can be with God for eternity. Our bodies, too, will be glorified. They'll be reunited with our soul, and we will be with the Father forever and ever.